There are countless shows about mechanics creating jaw-dropping cars and trucks, but anyone who's a fan of Diesel Brothers will tell you this one stood apart. The trucks weren't merely large, they were absolute beasts built to crush anything in their path. And right at the heart of that wild truck universe were two lifelong friends, Heavy D and Diesel Dave. They routinely poured tens of thousands of dollars into each project, stacking upgrade after upgrade until an ordinary truck looked anything but ordinary. But what if the trucks were only the visible part of the story? What if, beneath all the horsepower and chrome, there was a side of Diesel Dave's life that no fan would ever want to live through? This is the heartbreaking tragedy of Diesel Dave. We almost lost him, Dave, and I'm gaining speed a lot faster. I'm like, well, this is going to be a wild ride. This could be the end. That is the one thought. A few years ago, Heavy D released a video revealing an incident the Diesel Brothers had kept completely private for nearly 3 years. In that emotional upload he said words no fan ever expected to hear: "I nearly lost my best friend." That best friend was Diesel Dave. So what really happened? Heavy D has always had a deep fascination with snowcats, those enormous resort grooming machines that weigh close to 20,000 pounds, stretch 16 feet wide with their blades extended, and pack between 300 and 400 horsepower. They're engineered to climb impossible slopes and push massive walls of snow. He also owned a cabin near Farmington Peak in Utah. During summer you could drive right up the mountain road to reach it. But in winter everything changed. The Forest Service closed that road because it became far too dangerous. One particular stretch of that road was especially deadly. It ran along the edge of a sheer cliff. Above it loomed roughly 500 feet of vertical rock face. Below it dropped nearly 1,000 feet straight down. The road itself was only about 12 feet wide, sometimes narrower, and winter snow completely buried it. Drifts would pile 10 to 20 feet high until the road disappeared entirely, but Heavy D, being Heavy D, didn't avoid it. For years he took snowcats up there to carve the road open for snowmobilers and skiers. In January 2018 he and Diesel Dave decided to make the trip together, bringing their families along. By then Heavy D already owned 2 snowcats, an older gray one and his brand new red Piston Bully, freshly purchased at auction. Heavy D had years of experience running these machines in winter conditions, but Diesel Dave was still relatively new to operating them. This trip would be one of Dave's first real chances to drive a snowcat solo. On January 27, 2018, they loaded the families, kids included, into the 2 machines and headed up to the cabin. They spent the night there. The next day they decided to tackle the most hazardous section of the road, the cliffside stretch buried under massive drifts. Heavy D climbed into the red snowcat with his 7-year-old daughter Charlie and Diesel Dave. The gray cat stayed behind. At first everything went smoothly. The big red machine pushed forward, its blade slicing through the deep snow. Then, without warning, the slope above them gave way. A huge drift released. Snow roared down and slammed into the red cat, forcing it sideways toward the 1,000-foot drop. Suddenly the entire 20,000-pound machine was hanging half off the cliff. They didn't dare move another inch. Any shift in weight could tip it over the edge. Heavy D, Diesel Dave, and little Charlie froze inside the cab. After a tense moment they decided to shut the engine off and hike back to the cabin through waist-deep powder. Diesel Dave sprinted ahead to get help while Heavy D and Charlie followed. More slowly, making noise to scare off any coyotes in the darkness. When Dave reached the cabin he discovered the gray snowcat's battery was dead. They jump-started it, left the kids safely behind, and raced back to rescue the red machine. When they arrived, the red cat was still teetering on the brink. The plan was simple but dangerous: hook a chain between the 2 snowcats, use the gray one as an anchor, and slowly pull the red one back onto solid ground. For a brief second it looked like it would work. The gray cat dug in. The chain went tight. The red machine inched backward towards safety, then the chain snapped, the red snowcat lurched violently, twisted, and began sliding off the mountain, with Diesel Dave still inside. Heavy D could only watch in horror as the 20,000-pound beast spun, its headlights swinging wildly, then disappeared into the darkness as it plunged down the cliff. In that instant Heavy D was convinced he had just watched his best friend die. He dropped to his knees in the snow and screamed at the sky, begging God to save Dave. He faced an impossible choice: climb down the cliff on foot and risk his own life, or drive the gray snowcat around to the bottom. A quiet inner voice told him clearly, drive, don't walk. So he drove. Meanwhile, inside the tumbling red snowcat, Diesel Dave was living what he believed were his final seconds. He hadn't buckled his seatbelt. Normally a terrible decision, but in this case it saved his life. As the machine flipped and rolled, the windshield blew out, and Dave was ejected. Instead of being crushed inside the cab, he was thrown clear into deep, soft snow. He tumbled down the slope and finally came to rest buried up to his waist, dazed, in shock, barely able to move. He realized Heavy D might try to climb down the cliff to reach him, and if he did, they would both die. So Dave grabbed his phone. You might wonder, how could he possibly have cell service buried in snow at the bottom of a cliff? On the trail above, Heavy D's phone rang. When he saw Diesel Dave's name on the screen, he thought it was impossible. He had just watched him fall to his death. He answered, and heard Dave's voice, I think I'm okay. Heavy D raced the gray snowcat down the road, crossed a frozen pond, then ran uphill through chest-deep snow. At the base of the cliff he found shattered glass, twisted metal, and debris scattered across the slope, and then he heard Dave's voice again. His friend had been thrown clear immediately, landed in soft powder, and somehow avoided hitting the frozen pond below. If anything, even one small detail, had been different, he would have been gone. It was nothing short of a miracle that Dave was alive, but that night was only part of the story. To truly understand Diesel Dave, you have to know who he is, where he came from, and why so many fans feel such a strong connection to him. Who are the Diesel brothers? First things first, they are not actually brothers. Despite the name, the Diesel brothers are four big bearded friends from Utah who share one massive passion: diesel trucks. The core crew consists of David, Heavy D, Sparks David, Diesel Dave, Kiley Catan, The Muscle, Hoskins Joshua, Redbeard, Stewart. So how did it all begin? Heavy D started things by opening a diesel truck dealership. At first the focus was simple: buy older or broken down trucks, fix them up, and sell them for a profit. But the builds kept getting bigger and more extreme. Soon they realized they could do far more than just flip pickups. Heavy D and Diesel Dave began posting videos on Facebook and YouTube to attract customers. Those videos weren't only about trucks, they added pranks, funny skits, and over-the-top antics to keep people watching. One of those early videos exploded in popularity, so much so that it landed them an appearance on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. Believe it or not, a small diesel shop in Utah went straight to late-night national television. That single appearance changed everything. Shortly afterward, the Discovery Channel took notice. In January 2016, Diesel Brothers premiered on Discovery. And it didn't take long for viewers to get hooked. Each episode followed the crew buying trucks, building outrageous machines, and occasionally destroying them in spectacular fashion. They became famous for turning average pickups into jaw-dropping monsters, and then, in many cases, giving those trucks away to deserving fans. By 2019 the show had grown so popular that Discovery renewed it for a sixth season, which aired in December. In 2020 they took it even further with a 3-hour special titled Diesel Brothers, Monster Jam, Breaking World Records, a full-blown Monster Jam event where they pushed their trucks beyond anything anyone had seen before. Their projects were insane. Heavy D once took a beat-up rock crawler, rebuilt it from the ground up, Just to flip it. Another time they were hired to build a 1,000-gallon fuel truck and custom fertilizer spreaders for a helicopter company. Heavy D tried salvaging a wrecked overland camper he bought from Europe, hoping it would turn a big profit. The crew constantly rebuilt and upgraded trucks in every direction. Sam even built what they jokingly called the most dangerous minibike ever, using spare shop parts. Professional off-road racer R.J. Anderson brought his brand new Ford Raptor to Heavy D asking for upgrades. They squared off against other custom shops like Goon's Garage and Welder Up in head-to-head competitions. Of course, not every project went perfectly. Heavy D once attempted a Cummins-swapped K5 Blazer with a matching trailer for a client, but the deal fell apart. Some builds succeeded wildly, others ended in spectacular failure, but whether they won or lost, they always made it entertaining. Another memorable project turned an old K5 Blazer and truck bed into the ultimate diesel party wagon. Diesel Dave brought his beloved El Camino back to life with Heavy D's help. For one of their biggest builds, Heavy D went all in on a SEMA 6x6 truck fitted with a custom track system capable of handling any terrain. At the same time, Diesel Dave finally finished his dream El Camino, and revealed it at Monster Jam. So why do fans love this show so much? It wasn't only the trucks, the guys brought a completely different energy. They had inside jokes, wild ideas, and treated every build like a crazy adventure. As Redbeard once put it, people love it. And Heavy D explained it perfectly. You wouldn't think there are millions of people dedicated to diesel trucks, but there are. That's the Diesel Brothers story in a nutshell. For friends who started by flipping trucks, turned it into viral videos, landed a spot on late-night TV, and built a worldwide fan base with Discovery Channel. And if you're wondering how they all met, buckle up for another wild ride. How Diesel Dave and Heavy D became the Diesel Brothers. David Sparks, Heavy D, and David Kiley, Diesel Dave, love telling the story of how their friendship actually started. They didn't meet at a car show or in a garage, they met at a church singles event. The whole point was to meet girls, but instead Sparks and Kiley found each other. That was years ago, and it became the foundation of a friendship and business partnership that eventually grew into something massive. Their headquarters are in Salt Lake City, Utah, and they've built an empire. Sparks Motors is the main shop where the trucks are born and transformed. Diesel Power Gear is their lifestyle brand, selling clothing, accessories, and truck parts to fans. Diesel Sellers is an online marketplace that functions like Craigslist, but exclusively for trucks. On top of that, they're famous for their massive truck giveaways. Almost every major build ends with one lucky fan driving away in a fully custom machine. Whenever a giveaway happens, all their companies usually sponsor and participate, creating a powerful loop where every brand feeds into the others. One signature element that sets their builds apart is their heavy use of military surplus parts. Viewers frequently notice trucks running 2.5-ton axles, 6-wheel drive systems, and other components rarely seen on civilian vehicles. According to Heavy D, these choices aren't just for looks, they're about durability. They need parts that can handle extreme abuse in brutal conditions. He also points out the economics. They can buy a surplus military axle for around $500, even though the government originally paid tens of thousands. The only difference? The military no longer needs it. That access to military-grade components has led some fans to wonder whether any of the crew has a military background. The answer: neither Sparks nor Kiley ever served. But their families do have deep military roots. Kiley once tried to join as a helicopter pilot but was disqualified due to a shoulder issue. Sparks's father served in the Air Force, his grandfather in the Army, and his brother in the Marines. While Heavy D would have liked to serve, he admits he probably wouldn't have had the patience for constant orders. Instead, he feels that through their work, building trucks, creating jobs, supporting the diesel community, they're still contributing in their own way. For many diesel enthusiasts, jumping from a standard Dana 60 axle to a 2.5-ton military axle seems extreme. Heavy D explains it simply: a Dana 60 feels like a toothpick to me. Even after spending thousands upgrading it, it can still break. But breaking one of these military axles would take an insane amount of bad luck. Still, not every build relies on military parts. While fans sometimes assume every truck is fitted with them, that's not always true. People also frequently ask how much of Diesel Brothers is real versus scripted for television. Diesel Dave insists, everything you see on the show is real. For example, in the very first episode a Duramax truck caught fire. Heavy D later admitted the scene was set up to make a fire more likely during filming, but once it started, the blaze got completely out of control and became unplanned. He explained that in reality television, some events have to be recreated because cameras aren't always rolling when things happen naturally. He also admitted that fire safety is an area they've had to improve, because the people in their shop are like family, and their safety comes first. Their business has grown rapidly. They now employ roughly 50 people across all their companies. Growth has been fast, but it's also brought serious challenges. Fans often ask whether they take on custom builds for private clients. The answer: only a handful, because their schedule makes it nearly impossible. Each episode of the show requires them to complete about 1.5 vehicles, one fully finished for viewers to see, another prepped and partially built to keep audiences hooked for the next episode. At one point they were juggling 18 episodes simultaneously, meaning roughly 27 builds in progress. That kind of workload creates enormous pressure, especially since they try to make every truck completely unique. Instead of repeating designs, Heavy D says that's much harder, but it keeps the work fresh and exciting. Of course, no empire grows without enemies, and that's where the real shadows begin to fall across Diesel Dave and the Diesel Brothers. The Clean Air first case: for years the Diesel Brothers were best known on television for their outrageous truck builds and larger-than-life personalities. But behind the fame they were quietly locked in a years-long legal battle that threatened everything. In 2016 a group of Utah doctors, Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment, UPHA, filed a lawsuit against them. The physicians claimed that the Diesel Brothers and their companies had deliberately removed emissions control systems from diesel trucks. Those trucks became famous on the show and social media for rolling coal, blasting huge black clouds of smoke from their exhaust pipes. To some fans it looked like a cool stunt. To the doctors it looked like a deliberate public health hazard. They argued that when emissions controls are removed from modern diesel trucks, built in the last decade or so, those trucks release more than 30 times the pollution of an unmodified vehicle. In other words, one tampered truck could produce as much harmful exhaust as dozens of clean-running trucks. They estimated the increase at around 3,000% per vehicle. The doctors compared it directly to the Volkswagen emissions scandal, where vehicles were secretly altered to cheat emissions tests. Dr. Howie Garber, a UPHE board member, explained, pollution controls aren't just there because of the law. They exist to prevent diseases caused by air pollution. When those controls are removed, these trucks become disease-generating machines. Another physician, Dr. Brian Monch, added, diesel exhaust is hazardous. It's linked to heart attacks, strokes, lung disease, cancer, birth defects, and even sudden death. He emphasized that deliberately creating this kind of pollution showed callous disregard for public health, especially when the vast majority of vehicle owners follow the law and keep their emission systems intact. So the question shifted: were Dave and the Diesel Brothers knowingly making their community sicker? The case grew larger over time. In 2020 U.S. District Judge Robert Shelby in Salt Lake City ruled that David, Heavy D, Sparks, Joshua, Redbeard, Stewart, Catan, the Muscle, Hoskins, and others had committed approximately 400 violations of the Clean Air Act. Those violations included Removing pollution control equipment, selling devices designed to defeat emission systems, operating and selling the altered trucks on public roads. The penalties were massive. Judge Shelby ordered the Diesel brothers to pay $848,000 in fines. Most of that money went to the federal government. $90,000 was earmarked for a program in Davis County, Utah, to restore tampered diesel trucks. The judge also issued a permanent injunction legally barring them from ever doing it again. Importantly, this lawsuit did not originate with the government. While watching Diesel Brothers on Discovery, the doctors noticed the constant rolling coal and missing emissions equipment. Under the Clean Air Act, private citizens and organizations are allowed to sue violators directly. So UPG argued that the trucks featured on the show weren't just breaking the law, they were actively harming air quality and public health in Utah. To prove their point, UPG even purchased one of the altered trucks, a 2013 Ford F-250. After independent testing, they found it emitted 36 times more pollution than a stock vehicle. UPG spent $8,500 to reinstall proper emissions equipment before reselling it. In 2020, Judge Shelby fined the Diesel brothers $760,000, calling their actions flagrant misconduct. An appeals court later upheld most of the ruling, agreeing the punishment was not excessive. However, the judges sent one portion of the case back to the lower court for reconsideration, specifically whether fines should apply only to trucks sold or operated in Utah, or also to out-of-state sales. The final ruling clarified that penalties would be limited to Utah-related activity. Even so, the court made it crystal clear, the Diesel brothers were permanently barred from removing emissions controls or selling defeat devices. That if they ever did so again, they would face contempt of court charges. But this legal storm was only the beginning of the shadows that would follow Diesel Dave and his crew. The $1 million trademark judgment, the legal fight between the Italian fashion brand Diesel and Diesel Power Gear, the Utah-based merchandise and parts company founded by David Sparks, David Kiley, and Josh Stewart, began long before most fans ever heard about it. It officially reached federal court in New York on October 8, 2019, but the two sides had already been battling for years in trademark opposition proceedings. Diesel had repeatedly opposed Diesel Power Gear's attempts to register marks like Diesel Power Gear and Diesel Sellers. When the Utah company continued using, and filing for, those names on clothing, accessories, and parts, Diesel finally filed suit. The complaint alleged that Diesel Power Gear's use of the word diesel infringed on Diesel's trademark, diluted the brand's distinctiveness, and violated federal unfair competition laws. To support their claim, Diesel pointed to examples such as a white t-shirt with Diesel AF printed in bold white letters inside a red rectangle, almost identical to Diesel's famous red and white logo, and it wasn't just one design. Diesel argued that hundreds of shirts, hats, and other items crossed the line. So the central question became, could Diesel Power Gear continue using the word diesel on clothing and merchandise, or did that name belong exclusively to the fashion company? In March 2022, Judge Mary Kay Escochiel issued the first major ruling. She granted summary judgment to Diesel, meaning the court ruled on liability without needing a full trial. She found, 1. There was a clear likelihood of consumer confusion between Diesel Power Gear's branding and Diesel's trademarks. 2. Diesel's mark was famous, meaning Diesel Power Gear had illegally diluted it. The judge also concluded that Diesel Power Gear had acted willfully, because evidence showed they knew about Diesel's rights but continued anyway. Next came the damages phase, and the numbers became enormous. Diesel argued that Diesel Power Gear had generated $65.1 million in gross sales, and $59.1 million in net sales, after returns and discounts. They claimed the Utah company had failed to prove any legitimate business expenses that should be deducted. So Diesel asked the court to award nearly the entire net amount. Diesel Power Gear fought back hard. They argued damages should be limited to a much smaller subset of products, mainly clothing that prominently displayed the word diesel on the outside. They also asked the court to deduct a flat percentage for overall business expenses, but Judge Jennifer Reardon, who took over the case, disagreed. She ruled that liability wasn't limited to just obvious apparel. It extended to website branding, social media accounts, advertisements, hang tags, labels, and promotions, basically anywhere diesel power gear had used the word diesel to market itself. Judge Reardon also weighed the equity factors courts consider in these cases. Diesel power gear had actual knowledge of Diesel's trademarks that they continued after receiving a cease and desist letter, showing reckless disregard that they benefited financially from using the Diesel name. Other remedies would not adequately compensate Diesel for the harm. All of those factors pointed toward awarding profits to Diesel, because Diesel had already proven the sales figures, and Diesel power gear had not provided solid evidence of deductible expenses. Judge Reardon held them liable for the $59 million in net sales, but she did not award the full amount. While she agreed that giving Diesel the entire sum would prevent unjust enrichment, she also acknowledged it would be excessive in this case. Diesel had not shown direct proof of lost sales or harm to its business. There was no clear evidence of widespread consumer confusion. Not every product that used Diesel was directly tied to Diesel power gear's profits, especially items where the word wasn't prominently displayed. And although Diesel power gear's conduct was willful, it was not the most egregious form of infringement. So the judge reduced the award by 80%, the final judgment, $11.8 million in damages. In December 2023, the court also issued a permanent injunction barring Diesel power gear from ever using Diesel, or any confusingly similar mark, on clothing, accessories, or related merchandise. But even that wasn't the end of the shadows surrounding Diesel Dave and his crew. Diesel Dave finally speaks on his daughter Piper's terrible accident. Over Labor Day weekend, our girl Piper was in a pretty terrible car accident and she's been in the hospital fighting for her life, but she's making a miraculous recovery. Life turned into a living nightmare for Diesel Dave when his daughter Piper was involved in a devastating car accident. The crash happened over Labor Day weekend in September 2020. Leaving her in critical condition. She spent months in the hospital, undergoing multiple surgeries and fighting for her life. 4 months later, in January 2021, Diesel Dave posted an emotional video updating fans on her recovery. He said Piper was doing surprisingly well, shocking doctors with how strongly she was responding to treatment. Even though she had already endured numerous surgeries and had more ahead, she was showing incredible strength. When the diesel truck community learned what happened, they rallied hard. Diesel Power Gear and Diesel Dave launched a special campaign called Piper Strong. They created limited edition shirts and decals, with every dollar raised going directly toward Piper's medical bills and long recovery. The heartbreaking tragedy of Diesel Dave isn't only about almost losing his daughter. It's also about the night he and Heavy D barely escaped death on a frozen mountain road, and the years of brutal legal battles that nearly destroyed everything they had built. Yet through it all, how does he keep finding the strength to get back up? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember to like and subscribe if this story hit you, and before you go, check out the other videos on the channel for more real stories behind the gearheads we love.